Lang clustering of cases ang nalilimitahan mo, bibigyan pa ng ayuda yan ng gobyerno through the mayors, and of course the healthy population can still go to work. That is where you calibrate the health with the economy. It's still being done, the lockdowns, but it's on a micro level, granular. Kailangan mas effective po ito.
That was MMDA Chairman Benher Abalos making the case for the imposition of granular lockdowns and the return to stricter mobility curbs in NCR and nearby provinces. Restrictions for the NCR Plus bubble take effect today until April 4.
The return to tighter protocols hopes to cut even by 25% the current spread in COVID-19 infections. The cases today rose to a new single-day record to more than 8,000. Good evening, I'm Gretchen Ho.
And I am Robbie Alampa. You're watching The Big Story. Some businesses have taken the initiative to temporarily halt operations in compliance with government's move to place NCR and surrounding provinces in a quarantine bubble.
Palace calls for extended patience for all, saying the 2 weeks of heightened restrictions will hopefully lower down cases. Maricel Halili has a report.
As stricter restrictions make a turn, this private resort in Laguna started draining its pool. The resort operator is expecting clients to cancel their bookings.
Siyempre, malaking kawalan din sa amin yan dahil dyan lang kami umaasa kung mapapatigil talaga, kung talaga yung lockdown, kung talaga ila-lockdown. Yung mga customer nga namin, natakot na, nagkansela na.
But this shouldn't be the case. The palace said open-air tourist attractions are still allowed under the new protocols. Laguna joins Metro Manila, Cavite, Bulacan, and Rizal in the NCR Plus bubble. As part of the heightened restrictions, entry or exit beyond the boundaries of the bubble are not allowed, except for APOR or authorized person outside residence.
Tandaan po natin na within the bubble, the movement is not restricted. It is only when crossing the border na yun ang ating babantayan.
Several police checkpoints have been placed within Metro Manila. They check on compliance to health protocols and the observance of the curfew policy. Curfew is from 10 p.m. to 5 a.m. Violators may be penalized.
Ang arrest is nangyayari dun kung merong ibang mga kasamang ibang mga offense. Like for example, pumalag. More on caution ang binibigay natin dyan.
Mass gatherings, including religious activities, are strictly prohibited. Weddings, baptism, and funerals are allowed, but only with 10 people in attendance. Outdoor dining and takeouts in restaurants are okay, but indoor dining is barred. Minors and seniors are not allowed to go out, but there are exemptions. Senior citizens may go out for exercise and non-contact sports. The government hopes these measures will cut cases by as much as 25%.
At 7,999, 25%, malaki-laki pa rin po yan, no, kung we become successful. No? But of course, we're realistic, it will not happen overnight naman.
Bibigyan pa ng ayuda yan ng gobyerno through the mayors, and of course the healthy population can still go to work. That is where you calibrate the health with the economy.
Malacanang calls on the public to refrain from going out, especially now that it's almost Holy Week. For News 5, Maricel Halili, We Are One News.
How will the NCR Plus bubble affect the business sector? To get his reaction, we have Presidential Advisor for Entrepreneurship, Joey Concepcion. Mr. Concepcion, how do we frame this for our entrepreneurs, especially the small entrepreneurs who had been looking forward to a reopening of the economy, but now cannot deny the dire situation we are in? What's in store for the next 2 weeks? How do we brace them, and what should they expect?
Well, the way I see it is that there's no choice. I mean, we are seeing this infection rise up to about 8,000. And in reality, it's very difficult to balance lives and livelihoods. The moment you tilt towards one, like lives, livelihoods are affected and vice versa. But for us, at this point in time, that is the only way forward until the vaccines do arrive in the second quarter, and most of these vaccines will arrive in the third quarter. So we will have to hold on tight and try to manage. Yes, I know many micro and small entrepreneurs, especially in the tourism side, are expecting to take a bump during the Holy Week. But of course, the best time to really do this modified type of lockdown is at this point in time, because Holy Week, everybody is on break. So you actually save 1 week, no, basically. So the real effect here is just 1 week. of economic what do you call this movement, no. But of course, Holy Week, the tourism sector benefits from that because everybody goes to the provinces and all of that, and that will somehow affect whether it's allowed or not allowed. There's so much confusion already, so people just refrain, just stay home.
Speaking of what's allowed, not allowed, speaking of vaccines, you mentioned vaccines. You are the front part as well of the tripartite agreement with government and the private sector. And the private sector has been calling for more relaxed rules to allow them to purchase vaccines directly. Is there clarity on that point now?
Yes, I'd like to clarify that without government allowing the private sector to buy the vaccines through the tripartite agreement. Remember, these vaccines are under Emergency Use Authority, EUA. The vaccines have to be under the custody of the government, basically the DOH. They're the ones in charge of implementing. And we have made arrangements that as we purchase these vaccines, the AstraZeneca group of donors donated 100%, but 50%, I mean 100%, but 50% has been agreed that it will go back to our frontline workers. No? In the case of Moderna, Novavax, and the new one that we're introducing, Covaxin, the government does not require any more donations. So in a way, that's good. But then again, these vaccines have to be brought in by the government as well under the tripartite. So our group started with the help of Secretary Gautas, putting this tripartite to enable the private sector to actually access the vaccines. And by the way, the pharmaceutical companies will not sell the vaccines to the private sector directly because they will not have protection. They will not have indemnity. So the tripartite covers for indemnification, also protecting the pharmaceutical companies and protecting the private sector as well. No? This is supplemented now by the law that was enacted, and it covers now. It's now embodied in this law. No? And so I'd like to correct the impression that government is holding and not allowing private sector to buy vaccines. That is not correct. The government actually, together with the first group that we created, was a tripartite agreement. Without that tripartite agreement, then the vaccine procurement from the private sector will not be possible.
Maraming salamat po, Mr. Joey Concepcion. Now, stopping yet the uptrend in COVID-19 cases in the country. The Philippines just posted another record high in COVID-19 infections. Tonight's big number is 8,019. That's the number of infections logged over the past 24 hours. That is the highest single-day increase in the Philippines since the pandemic began. This brings the total caseload to 670,000. According to Bloomberg, the country's 7-day moving average in daily cases is now the highest in the region, surpassing that of Indonesia's. Globally, there has also been a marked spike in cases. The WHO has reported more than 3 million new cases around the world over the past week. That is a 10% jump from the week before. This brings total global cases to more than 123.3 million.
These are the other big stories tonight. Not exactly the ideal way to achieve herd immunity, but the Octa Research Group said 70% of NCR's population may be infected by the end of June if the surge is not controlled. Close to 500 private hospitals are nearing 85% occupancy for their COVID ward, but even if they want to increase in capacity, they're facing a looming shortage in nurses. And more than 200 militia-manned Chinese vessels were spotted near the Julian Felipe Reef in the West Philippine Sea. The Philippines wants what it calls an incursion to stop. These big stories after the break.
Good evening, you're still watching The Big Story. I'm Robbie Alampay. The horrors of a second wave of COVID-19 infections continue to unfold. Experts from the Okta Research Group are warning that cases in the capital region could reach 8.5 million, or 70% of its population, by the end of June. Mobile journalist Jacob Lazaro gives us the front seat to this story.
This is unprecedented. We haven't seen this kind of surge in NCR. This is a nightmare happening to us right now.
The ongoing surge is bad enough, but in an interview with One News The Chiefs, the Okta Research Group says it's going to get even worse before it begins to get better.
Actually, the next 2 weeks are a done deal already. This surge has a momentum. It's going to get worse before it gets better.
In fact, the group says that if the surge continues unabated, 8.5 million people in Metro Manila will have been infected by the end of June. That's already 70% of the population of the National Capital Region.
These are actual projections na by June 30 we'll reach 8.5 million total cases. If this trend reproduction number continues.
David remarked that this is not a good way to achieve herd immunity. Herd immunity is when 70% of the population gets enough antibodies to stop the spread of a disease. Ideally, it is done through vaccination, but in Metro Manila's case, it might just be done through infection.
If this trend continues by June 30, we will achieve herd immunity. 8.5 million people in NCR.
Okta projects new daily infections to hit 10,000 per day by the end of March. In 2 weeks, David says hospitals will be choking with patients again.
In line with what's happening with the trends right now, then we just have 2 weeks before the hospitals reach 70% critical care limit. So that's the critical threshold set by the Department of Health.
To stem the surge, the government has ordered a virtual bubble around to restrict mobility in and around Metro Manila. But in the end, the group says every person has an important role in stopping the surge.
I would treat everyone I encounter as potentially having the virus and act accordingly.
With the arrival of the vaccine and the implementation of stronger health protocols, we have a better chance in flattening the curve. Let's just hope that the infection doesn't catch up with our preparation. I'm Jacob Lazaro, and we are One News.
More hospitals in Metro Manila are already nearing full capacity, while more nurses are already exiting hospitals due to exhaustion. What are health authorities doing to address the problem? Jen Calimon tells us in this report.
Despite religiously following health protocols, Nurse Denny contracted COVID-19 in August last year when cases were at their peak. He is among 15,000 medical frontliners who tested positive for the virus.
Ang iniisip ko na lang noon, ma'am, kailangan kong gumaling eh. Hindi talaga ako umuwi, sabi ko na lang muna talaga ako sa hospital for 25 days.
Upon recovery, he had to tend to more cases. In a COVID ward, a nurse typically attends to 3 patients, but the recent spike has bumped that up to 12 patients.
Nakakapagod siya mentally, pinakauna kasi dami mong iniisip, daming pangangailangan ng pasyente.
The Filipino Nurses United is seeking a spike in resignations due to exhaustion.
That's extremely alarming, Jen, no? Kasi it manifests yung extent of or gravity of the health crisis. Talagang pag narinig mo sila, overwhelmed rin sila with.
The looming shortage in nurses is hampering efforts to increase COVID wards among private hospitals. The health department urged private hospitals to increase COVID bed allocation by 30%.
Ang mga private hospitals, we try as much as possible to extend yung percentage na yun. However, because of the lack of nurses, medyo limited ang aming resources.
The Private Hospitals Association of the Philippines said about 500 member hospitals are nearing 85% occupancy rate. 30 are already under critical level. including St. Luke's in Taguig and Quezon City and Asian Hospital, all of which have reached full capacity. But with severe cases only accounting for 2% of admissions, FAPI said the situation is still manageable. For the Alliance of Health Workers, a break might be the offing.
Pahalagahan naman sila kasi 1 year na tayo, and then yung mga benefits ay hindi pa rin nabibigay, mababa pa rin ang sahod, understaffed pa rin, tapos mababa ang budget pangkalusugan, at dapat ituloy-tuloy.
But the Philippine Medical Association begs to differ.
The doctors should never go on a timeout. We should be more adept and we should be more competent in handling these cases now.
The DOH said it's doing what it can do to address the lack of manpower across hospitals. Reporting for News 5, Jen Calimon, We Are One News.
The British and South African variants of COVID have already been confirmed in a number of locations across Metro Manila. That's according to the DOH. Undersecretary Maria Rosario Vergeres says there are now 76 cases of the UK variant in the capital. There are also 105 of the South African variant. Vergeres says the new variants caused a surge in the region, but poor compliance with health protocols remains the root cause.
Yan po ay factual na. Kailangan natin i-confer sa WHO if indeed community transmission of these variants are present already.
Time for our next look at some of the day's big stories. More Sinovac doses are on its way to the Philippines. The country expects to receive 400,000 additional doses of Sinovac donated by the Chinese government this week. This puts the total donated Sinovac shots to the country to 1 million. Another 1 million doses of Sinovac procured by the national government are set to be delivered by March 29. The DOH also said that unused jabs by March 24 will be recalled and redeployed to areas experiencing a spike in cases. The Health Department urges the public to avoid cutting the line in the vaccination program. Health Undersecretary Maria Rosario Vergeres said the government's prioritization list should be respected. The rollout places health workers, the elderly, and vulnerable individuals on top. Vergeres says they receive reports of those who skip the line to get vaccinated ahead of their turn. Gyms in NCR plus areas may now operate up to 75% capacity, while spas may operate at a capacity of up to 50% in the next 2 weeks. However, Palace spokesman Harry Roque says this is still subject to LGU adjustments. Time for another quick break. When we return. With more than 200 Chinese vessels spotted in the West Philippine Sea, a maritime expert warns against overfishing and environmental damages. And with the pandemic forcing malls to quit live music, a 72-year-old mall pianist takes his skills online. His notes will tug at your heartstrings when we return.
Good evening. You're still watching The Big Story. I'm Robbie Alampay. The government is protesting the presence of more than 200 Chinese vessels near a reef within the Philippines' exclusive economic zone. An expert is warning the latest incursion puts the Philippines' largest fishing ground at risk. Marian Enriquez with the details.
A clear provocation. This is how Defense Chief Delphine Lorenzana described the presence of 220 Chinese fishing vessels near the Julian Felipe Reef with the international name WHITSUN Reef. Lorenzana demanded China to stop the incursion and recall the boats. Maritime expert and UP Institute for Maritime Affairs and Law of the Sea Director J. Batong Bakal fears that China will reclaim the Whitsun Reef. That's after occupying the Johnson South and McKinnon Reefs.
Nakakatakot ngang isipin na baka maglagay ng pangatlong artificial island ng China sa Whitsun Reef, and ibig sabihin nun, kontrolado na niya yung buong reef. Again, tuluyan na mawawala talaga ng fishing ground ang Pilipino dun sa Union Bank.
Covering 1,920 hectares, the Whitsun Reef has an estimated value of 34.5 billion pesos worth of marine resources based on UP Marine Science Institute metrics. The boomerang-shaped shallow coral reef is one of the biggest in the country. It's located 175 nautical miles west of Bataraza, Palawan, within the Union Bank, one of the biggest fishing grounds for Filipino fisherfolk. The Philippine Coast Guard believes the hundreds of vessels spotted in the area are manned by Chinese maritime militia. According to the National Task Force for the West Philippine Sea, there are no signs that fishing activities are being conducted, but they do warn against possible overfishing and destruction of the marine environment. Batong Bakal stressed that authorities should closely monitor China's activities. He suggested close coordination with Vietnam, who also has outposts in the Union Banks.
Sila yung mas magiging directly affected kung sakaling ang ganun yung gawin ng China na i-consolidate yung control niya dun sa Union Banks.
For now, the Armed Forces of the Philippines has already conducted an aerial patrol in the area. Foreign Affairs Secretary Teddy Boy Locsin said the Philippines has also fired off a diplomatic protest to China. For News 5, Marian Enriquez, we are One News.
Let's take a look at the biggest stories on print and online. The Health Department says more than 336,000 people have received COVID-19 vaccines so far. 1.1 million doses, or 98% of the country's current supply, have been distributed. These were administered in over 1,600 vaccination sites across the country. The surge in cases will likely pose a threat to the country's recovery prospects, according to NEDA. Business World reports that Socio-Economic Planning Chief Carl Kendrick Chua sees an increased risk to recovery, although he says there's room to manage. Government pegs economic growth this year at 6.5 to 7.5%, coming from a contraction in 2020. Despite the uptick in cases, Chua says this goal is still achievable. And from News 5, retiring Chief Justice Diosdado Peralta was given a scaled-down farewell ceremony as cases continue to surge. Peralta's immediate family and only a select few physically attended the ceremony. The rest had to watch online. The Supreme Court itself has recorded 37 cases.
In world news, parts of Sydney face their worst flood in 60 years as torrential rains are expected to continue for at least 2 days. Australia's Weather Bureau is reporting that large parts of Sydney's east coast will get more heavy rain starting today. This is being brought on by a combination of a tropical low over the northeastern part of Western Australia and a coastal trough of New South Wales. Some 18,000 people have been evacuated from low-lying areas, with thousands more set to be evacuated.
For the big stories in sports, the LA Lakers suffered a torching courtesy of the Phoenix Suns on Sunday, with LeBron James sitting out the game after an ankle injury in a previous match. The Suns cruised to a 111-94 victory over the Lakers, led by Devin Booker and DeAndre Ayton, both pitching in 26 points each. Chris Paul also doing his share, scoring triple-double. Lakers coach Frank Vogel says he doesn't know how much time LeBron will miss out to recover from his injury. This is their second loss this season without James. In local basketball, the Rocket out. Phoenix veteran JC Intal is hanging his jersey after 13 years in the game. JC took to Instagram to announce his retirement from basketball. He thanked his family, friends, and teammates for sharing memories with him as he pursued his love for basketball. It may be a bittersweet feeling, but Intal is happy to move forward after 13 years of playing. Prior to suiting up for the Fuel Masters, JC played for the San Mig Coffee Mixers and Gilas Pilipinas.
No one likes a mad woman. You made her like that.
The Queen of Talk just now. Chris Aquino released a tell-all video Sunday addressing several issues in her life.
I'm willing to go to war. Because, ito na yung hinihintay nyo na because. Because.
Chris slammed those who are bullying her sons. Joshua's been accused of impregnating someone. Bimbi has been repeatedly ridiculed as gay on social media.
Utang na loob naman. This is 2021.
Chris also revealed she tried to rekindle her relationship with ex-boyfriend Herbert Bautista. She said Bimbi is giving his vote to Quezon City's former mayor. She clarified the usage of the word is not electoral. Chris also criticized how her philanthropy is being tagged as politicking, especially that her parents are prominent political figures, Senator Ninoy and President Cory.
Hindi po ako kagaya ng iba. Hindi po ako epal. Wala po akong history na nagnakaw ako sa taong bayan.
She warned critics.
Tama na. Sobra na. Lalaban na.
For News 5, MJ Marfori, we are One News.
A 72-year-old mall pianist from Manila is capturing the hearts of netizens as he takes his gigs online. Performing in malls was the bread and butter of Vidalito Infante or Lolo Bong, but with musicians becoming casualties of the pandemic, he has resorted to playing piano online. Going on Facebook Live allowed him to provide for his needs and medication, as well as to reconnect with fans. His playlist includes kundimans, OPMs, and basically any request from listeners. Lolo Bong's next piano marathon is on April 4 on Easter Sunday.
We needed that.
And I think anybody who's been to the malls knows who he is. Diba? I
Siya ba yung sa
personally-
Rockwell?
Siya yung sa
Ah, siya
Rockwell,
yun, siya
diba?
yun.
I
Ang
mean,
galing.
that really looks like him. I'm sure a lot of people miss him. Not just the old people requesting, pati yung mga bata, diba?
It's nice to see him adjust and pivot to the new normal. And looking forward to his concert on April 4, definitely.
Easter Sunday.
Well, that wraps up today's big story. Catch us again tomorrow at 8 p.m. on Signal Channels 8 and 250.
Please like our Facebook page, One News. For more in-depth analysis, visit our webpage, onenews.ph. Mask on.
Wash hands.
And stay safe, Philippines. I'm Robbie Alampay.
I'm Gretchen Ho, and we are One News. Have a good evening.